and rich presentations. I'll try not to speak so fast, but please tell me if I go too fast, and I'll try to slow down. The title of the speech is The Palestinian Diaspora, Roots and Roots, Conflicts, Expulsion, and the Effects on Family. How do we do this? Can you... So this is my name, and I'm Professor in Peace and Development Research at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. I was here the first time in 1989, and then I visited refugee camps Jalason and Dhishe, and at that time I was very unaware of the situation of the Palestinian refugees, and I was shocked, and then I became also attached to the Palestinian community and to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And that's, although I'm not from the Mediterranean countries, but from the far north, where it's much colder and so forth, maybe that's why, I don't know. But I recognize that I'm doing research, and hence I've come back and forth for several years. But I have to be honest with you, I haven't been here for a long time, and that's why it's special for me to be back. And actually, I have never seen the wall before, and I knew before that I would be shocked, but the extent of that wall is, I think, not possible to comprehend until you see it. Then I also wrote a book about the Palestinian diaspora, which was published by Routledge some years ago. And I've also, apart from that, studied how identity is related to conflict in more general and theoretical terms. I studied new wars in African societies, and I studied how war-torn societies can be reconstructed after protracted war and conflict. Currently, I'm the acting dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Gothenburg, which means that I'm more involved in the university bureaucracy than anything else, and I don't have so much time for doing research, which is another reason why it's nice to be here. The focus of this lecture, thank you, is not so much the Palestinian family as such, because I'm not a sociologist, nor an anthropologist, nor an ethnographer, but rather the factors that shape the Palestinian family, how wars, how refugeeship, how displacement, how diaspora, how occupation, and the protracted conflict affect Palestinian identity and family, and the very strong interlinkages that you can find between Palestinian national identity as such and the role of the family. The book, The Palestinian Diaspora, which I wrote it, but I forgot it at the hotel room, I'm sorry. It deals with how Palestinian identity is shaped by the exile condition, by displacement, dispersal, and fragmentation. How that is very important factors in shaping the specificness and the uniqueness of Palestinian identity. It focuses on the connections between Palestinian identity and land, and different representations of land. But it also tries to shed some light on new and what you might call transnational options, how Palestinian identity is also shaped and molded in different places in which they reside currently. Geographical focus of the book was the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Jordan, Washington DC, and Sweden, in order to get the differences in how Palestinian identity is still shaped by links to Palestine and the land, but also how it is altering and adjusting to new circumstances. I did that through studying both different kinds of policy documents and literature and poetry translated into English, and I find that a very rich and a treasure, actually, of understanding how Palestinian identity is shaped and what it means. But also through interviews, qualitative interviews with Palestinians in those different geographical locations. Because I think one important starting point for all of this is that it is not only the Palestinian population which is scattered and dispersed through 1948, through 1967, and different kind of continuous movements, but also the very Palestinian family is fragmented and scattered. This is a quote which I found in a book by Osama Lind. It says like this: "Our family is scattered. I have have a son in Abu Dhabi. I have brothers in Libya. I have sons in America. I have to travel to see my kids. When I am in Lebanon, I can't stop thinking about what's happening to my kids in America. The day I get to America and see my kids, I start thinking, how are they doing back in Lebanon? I don't find anybody with anyone else anymore. I think that's a significant kind of quote. How the Palestinian family is scattered and dispersed throughout the world, to the extent that in the very same family you can find stateless refugees in Lebanon or in Gaza, migrant workers in the Gulf, refugees in Jordan, and citizens of the United States of America. In the very same family you then have very different sorts of citizenship and legal identities. And I think that this is, if not unique to the Palestinian case, then very special, and it affects also family life to a large extent. Just some brief notes on how to conceptualize all of that, because I think that there is a need to bring concepts to this, the ways that Palestinian identity and family life is molded by experiences of refugeeship and diaspora. I think that space and time are such crucial principles that structure social relations of various sorts. You know, space is important. Where are you? And where are your social relations? Are they in Palestine, or are they in Palestine and outside of Palestine, or are they outside Palestine? And then where? I think space, geography, place, room is very important for how you identify yourself and for how your social relations are constructed. Time is important, the history, the flow of time. When are you, and when are your social relations? This has an impact on identity and family. And for Palestinians, as both a nation, a population, and identity, and as families, especially space is very extreme. It's very extreme, has an extreme impact, and it's extreme. And I'll come to that. Because in a sense, you can say that Palestinian families, like this quote showed, Palestinian families are transnational. They're very transnational in the sense, in the way that they are spread out through the world. And Palestinian identity is therefore defined by movement, which is, you could call it almost a hyper movement. You know, Mahmoud Darwish, that the Palestinians are the wanderers of the earth. There is a perception of Palestinians to be on an endless journey somewhere out in the world, on the globe, which is defined ultimately by the dispersal, the expulsion in 1948, and fragmentation, but also continuous mobility. It's not, I know, Palestinians have continued to move after 48 and after 67. Palestinians have been internally displaced in Lebanon. Now, most recently, Palestinians, I think that's something to think about, both as a fact and analytically. How the Palestinian refugees in the Gaza Strip were displaced during the recent war on Gaza, and how, I think that's something that was unique also, how the refugees in the Gaza Strip couldn't become refugees. They were hindered to become refugees, but refugees were internally displaced during that utterly horrible experience and could go nowhere. But Palestinians have also been internally displaced in Lebanon. Palestinians have moved as laborers to the Gulf, and they have moved to Europe and the Americas to study and to work or so forth. For example, the Palestinians who reside in Sweden, most of them are descendants or came to Sweden after the war in Lebanon in 1982, meaning that they were descendants of refugees from 1948, but were displaced during the war in Lebanon in 1982 and then came to Sweden. And this has meant like a life in liminality, a life in waiting, where many refugees have experienced that real life isn't now, isn't in this place or in this time, but real life has to come. Real life has to come through a return. Yeah. But there is also another side to this. Palestinians are extremely mobile, I said, almost like a hyper-movement, hyper-mobility, but at the same time Palestinians are so restricted in their movements. There is an immobility, a denial to move. the Palestinians are confined. They are restricted, forbidden, or refused movement. And in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, that becomes like very obvious and very clear how the Palestinians are stopped at borders. There are some authors who have written very densely and richly about that, the Palestinian experience at borders, whether it be an airport, a checkpoint, or any kind of border where Palestinians are questioned about their identity just because they are Palestinians and they are restricted in their movement. We have the curfews, the checkpoints, the demolition of homes and houses, which is also something which restrains Palestinian movements. The destruction of olive orchards, the fences and so forth. And I think that the wall around the West Bank is but the latest, but perhaps the most absurd of those kind of confinements that the Palestinians are subject to. Palestinians often describe this immobility in the sense that they are shut out, they are denied from going between different places. Someone said to me like this: we are thrown from one airport to another and no one wants to accept us. This kind of feeling of being destitute and hindered in free movement. There is one metaphor of this which I think is very telling, life as prison or life in prison. I think that already in 1994, when circumstances were very different, Gaza Palestinians talked about Gaza as one big prison to which the Israelis had locked the fence, the door, and thrown the key in the Mediterranean. And today I think you could say that Gaza is the world's largest prison of civilians. But also the wall, the West Bank wall, resembles prison walls. So this condition of I think, very contradictory ways of how movement is part of Palestinian life and movement or immobility creates a very rootless and restless condition, an identity which is somehow out of place, homeless, and on a constant journey, which leads to a very intense search and then connection to the land and the idea of the land. Rosemary Sayir, in her very path-breaking books about refugees in Lebanon, she describes how refugees, the first decades actually, were decades of mourning and sense of loss of direction, that the refugees didn't know where to go, didn't know what will happen to them. I think we can skip that. So this, I think this means that home has received home and place and land has received a very special meaning, because that which has been lost, you need to constantly search for or try to find. But it is difficult to recreate this kind of sense of home in exile. Therefore, I think it's one interesting. I mean, we talked about in the panelists spoke about different kinds of stories, and some stories I think that to recognize and emphasize are the stories that have been told by refugees about their former homes and about Palestine from afar, and how that has been remembered. And often refugees, for example in Lebanon, remember the place that was lost in very glorified terms, in a sense idealized and romanticized. Much talks about how beautiful life was before. Our house was beautiful, life was beautiful, and we lived in paradise, which of course is not true in the sense of the word that it was like that every day. But nevertheless, it's important that that's how Palestinian refugees remember their past. So the actual house and home, I mean, that's also where families reside in houses and homes, has become a very strong focal point for remembering and also for the political solution. I think just to stay around that for a little while, home is for everyone. I mean, that's universally so, that home is the place where you're supposed to be secure in senses of the word. And if home is lost, then where is your security if you don't have a home anymore? If you feel that you are homeless, even if you perhaps are able to reconstruct or construct a home or a house, how can your security be then reconstituted? Just a small anecdote. In 2001, after September 11 and in the autumn of 2001, there were the incidents in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and lots of demolition of houses. My daughter, she was then 5 years old, and she was kind of experiencing some kind of awakening through television, of course, getting to know a little bit of the world. And she said like this: I hate Osama bin Laden and I hate Ariel Sharon. I hate them just as much because they destroy people's homes and houses. And I think I'm telling that just to let you know how the sense of home being so important for everyone. And when your home is destroyed or demolished, she could, from her very secure position in Sweden, she could kind of feel that empathy. What if my home was destroyed? What would I do? I think it's also important I think we're next one. Okay, we can stay there then. I think maybe they are. But the loss of place is also a loss of time, actually, and I think Palestinian refugees often speak about that. But the loss of place, the loss of home, is also a loss of time. You lost something which is even more than the loss of home and house. Someone has said that the places we yearn for are really periods of time. A Palestinian in Sweden whom I talked to, he spoke about his mother in this way. For her, it's like time that had been cut off. She still imagines that the horses are left and that the food that they gave them was enough for this time. But there has been some kind of like stop in time, and that it's possible to return also to this time. So history and remembering is of course very important then to constantly reconstituting the Palestinian identity. And the role of the family has been very important in this, in narrative, in telling stories about Palestine, about history, telling generations about 1948, about Nakba, about different historical events. And also the reproduction of different ideas and images and memories of Palestine between generations. And in this sense, the Palestinian family has been highly important and provided some kind of institution, educational institution in telling about the Palestinian history and telling about how it was back then in 1948. So family has had an important role in forming and constructing national identity. Mostly, at least that's what many have told in that project, mostly it has been women and elderly that have been giving those stories and narrations about history and about a place. It has also been underlined in different studies that there is a change as regards this, because the parental generation of today doesn't have any, among the refugees, doesn't have any memories of their own to share. They can only share the memories which their parents had shared with them. And therefore I think the importance of what was underlined before, the importance of institutions that take on that kind of task to tell the history will be important. Otherwise there might be, and perhaps that's already recognized, a thinning out, I think, of history and remembering. Another side of this is for people who grew up in exile. This is also a Palestinian in Sweden. He said, I have nothing. I talked about Lebanon before and Sweden after, but the whole base is gone. My mother talks about something else. She talks about picking oranges, going in a horse cartridge. My father was a Bedouin, his sheep, his cow, his milk and lamb. I haven't got that. And that means something, that when you grow up in exile, you experience not only a loss, but a lack, because you never had it. You never had that basis, you never had the territory, so there is a lack. The basis of identity that the parental generation experienced is not only lost, but never experienced, but just only, quotation, narrated. It's a told experience. And I think that's an important question for future research. What does that ultimately mean for connections to land? And what does that ultimately mean for Palestinian identity and for Palestine? Next one. Just a few words about struggle and resistance. That was also underlined here, that the refugee experience is like the basis for struggle and resistance in many types of the world. Because the ultimate aim of the struggle was to return. You know, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when there was a change of conceptions, the change of conception of Palestinian identity to go from being refugees, from being victims, to being returnees was a very important and significant political shift in Palestinian identity, to do something, to struggle, to return. And like suffering and struggling are two poles of Palestinian identity which comes forward very much in different interviews, that there is a suffering because of what has been done to the Palestinians, but there is also just as important to struggle in order to change that course of events. Someone actually expressed it that way, a suffer for Palestine and a struggle for Palestine. That's the meaning and essence of being a Palestinian, a young activist said to me. The struggle is also gendered to a large extent, which was always also underlined before, that there are different roles for men and women in the struggle. And also education has been seen as a struggle to invest. That's also something which was underlined before, to invest in children, to see them educated in order to restore hope in the future. However, there is also something else to Palestinian identity, which I think was talked about a little bit in the Italian experience, that there is identities move. Identities do not stay the same all the time, although there is something which is like perceived as essentially Palestinian, or for that matter essentially Swedish. All identities move, they don't stay the same. And like new theories about transnationalism and globalization, they are often said to be problematic in the Palestinian case because of the deep links that the Palestinians continue to have to the land, and that because of the Palestinian identity being so highly connected to the conflict, to what is happening to the Palestinians and their faith, that identity has to be essentialized in a way. But I think that there are things, you can switch, happening in this sense that, you know, the Palestinians have been dispersed for more than half a century, and that must have an impact. It does have an impact. Identities change. There are generations who are born and growing up in exile, and who, we said before, have no memories or images of themselves, but lead new kinds of life and have new kind of social relations, and that means a lot to how identity is formed and formulated. Next one again. But before we go further in this, how transnationalism affects Palestinian identity, I'd like to say something about how families, how the extent to which Palestinian family is transnational. When one talks about transnationalism generally and theoretically, it's important that it's often families who are the main, diaspora families who are the main actors in creating a kind of new transnational conditions, because keeping a dispersed family together is impossible without kind of transnational relations. So there are different ways, which are in a sense routinized, but also very difficult and often expensive ways of doing this, of keeping the family together. Bassam in Washington, he said, there hasn't been a Saturday that I haven't called back home, and I visit every year. But this, I think I lost something. No, it's okay. This is also, I mean, keeping the family together is very differentiated and variegated. Because the Palestinians in the diaspora live in so highly varied circumstances, we have the destitute refugees in Lebanon, everything from there to middle-class Palestinians in the United States of America. So the means of keeping the family together are simply unequally distributed among the Palestinians. Next one. The family is very much important in the family as such, in keeping the Palestinian population together, because the family is like a source of security and stability. You don't have your home anymore, your former home, so the family become very important as an institution, as a social security net. And it is through the family that the contact with Palestine is maintained. And that is done through various forms. The family is important in kind of like cushioning, transformative and difficult events. Remittances are sent from Sweden, from the USA, from different parts of the world to Lebanon, to the Gaza Strip. Those kinds of economic activities, I think, are very important. And they're important not only in the Palestinian case, but in many migrant societies. And for some countries, it's the main source of foreign exchange. So that's highly important economic activity in the world, transnational economic activity. The family is important in finding job in new societies. If you come as a new as an asylum seeker or refugee to Sweden, for example, your family, your relatives, will help you find a job, will help you find housing, and the family is important in keeping together through important events such as funerals and weddings, for example, because that's occasions, funerals and weddings, when many Palestinians abroad are eager to come and visit, to be part of such important events. So through writing letters, phone calls, visiting, summer visits, vacations, and visits for important events, like those kind of transnational relations are maintained. However, there are also changes. The Palestinian family in the diaspora is changing. For example, it is common that in the diaspora you find your spouse at other places, at a workplace or universities and school. And marriage patterns also to one extent become transnational in different ways. In one way, as Palestinians who are perhaps citizens and residents of the USA, they find spouses among other Palestinians, for example in the Gulf or in the West Bank, because they find it difficult to find a proper spouse in the United States and rather want to marry with a Palestinian. But it is also there is also an increase in marrying foreigners, and especially among men, to marry Swedish or American or Italian, I would assume, women. Return travels. There are such return travels you could call, that you go for vacation. That for many parents abroad it's very important to bring their children who are born in Sweden or Italy or in the USA to Palestine, or to if that's not possible, to bring them to camps in Lebanon, to get to know for themselves the Arabic language, what Palestine is, or what the refugee situation is like. And there are also summer visits. I think in the summer, many young American Palestinians come to the West Bank to spend time with relatives and to study, sometimes to receive education in, for example, Arabic. But there is also some notions that there is a decline in the importance of the Palestinian family in the diaspora, simply because it's so difficult to maintain those intense social relations. And that means that the family shrinks and becomes smaller. Nabil in Beirut, he said like this: I only see my brother every 5 or 6 years. You lose touch with their daily lives and daily problems. We talk on the phone, you make sure that they are okay, and that's it. They become strangers. So on the one sense, it's very important for families in the diaspora to keep together through various kinds of transnational activities, but it's difficult, and with time it becomes even more difficult. And family becomes a bit like shrinking or less important. For example, you know that people or families who in Sweden or Italy, for example, they also need to cope with new situations. They need to cope with what does it mean to be a minority community in Sweden or Italy. There are new social norms and social codes to take care of. And the kind of short meetings, that is often the case, that you go to Palestine for a summer vacation. It's a short visit, and it's often in settings that are outside the everyday life. It's festive events, weddings, or vacations, and a lot of things need to be said and sorted out, and it's difficult to do that in a short period of time. And often there are also different interpretations of social codes and norms, which means that there are perhaps disappointments, that you don't think the same way anymore. Fadwa, she said like this: I can't travel so much, I can't afford it. All of us, we haven't seen each other in maybe 15 years, it's a long time. I call more often to my friends, those who were with me in Cyprus. She had spent a time in Cyprus with a PLO. They mean more to me because they understand. So there was a sadness in this, that because it was too expensive to travel, she lost, but it was so depressing that she didn't really manage to try to keep up contacts to that extent, but she rather kept contact with her friends. Also, then there is a new context. There is new surroundings of influence, but also actually, for example, in Sweden, the Palestine continues to be a center of social life, in the sense that if you meet Swedish friends, it is often those who are politically engaged and committed, and you meet them politically. So Palestine is very much a center of social life, also when you socialize with Swedes, for example. Yeah. And that's also, as was spoken about in the Italian case, that there is still an importance in this, and recreating Palestine from afar. That this is done culturally, that you keep items in your home that remind you of Palestine. But there is also pretty high and intense political mobilization. For example, during the war in Gaza, you could see, I was struck by this actually, young Palestinian women, rather progressive politically, and having grown up in Swedish societies, who had been in the Gaza Strip, but managed to get out during the war. And the way they spoke, they had an understanding and support and sympathy for Hamas that I don't think that they would have had before the Gaza Strip. And they expressed that in the Swedish society. So there is a very high political mobilization. But that politicization is also often defined or influenced by host society. For example, in Sweden, Palestinians have been very much engaged with the Social Democrats, and the most, the strongest political organization among the Palestinians in Sweden has been what's been called the Palestine Labor Union, because of its strong connections with the Swedish Labor Union and the Swedish Social Democrats. So the ways that Palestinians abroad organize politically are influenced by the host society. There is also new information technology, which is an important way of reconnecting with Palestine. You use network societies for political activity and for recreating your identity. I think Al Jazeera has an impact. At home, we speaking about the skewed or the biased Western media during the Gaza Strip. We only watched Al Jazeera, and my daughter, who had her second international awakening during the Gaza war, she also watched. She's 13 now, Al Jazeera all the time, and she has her English has become much better through that, but also her understanding of what's been happening in the Gaza Strip. I think we're running out of time, so I'll skip a few. You can skip that. There we can stay. The next one before. I think all of this, this kind of variegated experience, gives rise to new concepts of both home and Palestinianness. Many Palestinians in the world, they say that home is carried with us. We don't have Palestine left as a home, so we carry that with us. We carry our home with us. Another concept is that my home is where my family is. That's where home is. Mahmoud in Sweden, he had 3 homes, he said. Nahal al-Bared in Lebanon, where I am born, he said. That's one home. And Palestine is my country. That's also my home. But Sweden is also home, because here I feel security. Next one again. And for him, he underlined the importance of Swedish citizenship as important for his connection to Sweden. That here he received a passport, and that's important. He said like this once: "When they deported me from Ben Gurion, it was so terrible. They took me with a police car, and they took my passport and gave it to the pilot. I applied with SAS, and the pilot said to me, 'Welcome,' in Swedish. And it felt as though I could be welcomed somewhere. And that was highly important. I mean, to have the passport, the citizenship, and to feel secure in that. That's often the case for Palestinians in Sweden. Their connections to Sweden, although difficult many times, is through the social welfare system, security system, and the political system, which Palestinians seem as well organized and easy to cope with. And again, the passport. Fadwa, a woman, she said like this: "I never had a country or a passport." Really, continuously, that's very important. But it is also important that Palestinians are integrated in Swedish society. And that's sometimes difficult for parents to keep with. Because what are the norms for teenagers to go out, for example, in the evenings? What are the activities at school? And parents go through a lot of efforts in order to make sure that the children have both. That they both have a Palestinian identity and a new identity. So they celebrate, for example, Palestinian, Arabic, Islamic celebrations of different sorts, but also Midsummer and Christmas, the kind of Swedish way. Mostly because for the sake of their children, to make sure that they are not excluded or alienated from Swedish society. Fadwa again, she said that my daughter is half-half. I'm not. I'm just Palestinian. My daughter is half-half. She's both. So that means that identity alters. It changes. There's been a lot of theoretical discussions about hybridity and new kinds of identity. But I don't think that's the accurate way of describing this. I think it's more like complementary identities that you add and subtract, and you maintain your Palestinian identity, but you add various things. And those things differ from different places of the world. For Palestinians in the United States, for example, It can be very polarized in a sense, because many appreciate the American way of life, freedom, etc., but are highly frustrated with the US foreign policy and feel an anomaly or ambiguity in those senses. So it's like more like complementary identities, actually. Can I say a few words about return? Can I say a few words about return? Yeah. Then we go a little bit further. I'll say stop. Yeah, return. We spoke about that before. Return is very important as the ultimate goal. That's the ultimate goal. Not only politically, but socially, emotionally, for your home, your family, your household. But it does become increasingly abstract. I think we all know that. For example, this is what Rami said. He lives in Washington, D.C. He said, "My grandfather lived all his life attached to small transistor radio, listening to the news, believing that one day they broadcast on the news that all refugees are now able to return to their villages. He died in a small mud house in the camp at the age of 90, 2 feet away from his transistor radio, just still believing that someday it would be announced that return was possible." Today, we know that for the 48th generation, it will hardly be possible to return whatever kind of solution there is. But return does occur in some ways. It occurs in other ways. It has occurred, not in a true sense, but like through return visits. You know, some of those have been highly visible, like the return visit of Edward Said and other high-profile Palestinians. There are also those kind of vacation and summer returns that I talked about. There has been return from the USA and from the Gulf and from Tunis, etc. But it's also, among Palestinians in the diaspora, there's also some fear about this return. Fadwa, she said like this: "I've been planning to go to Jaffa, and she could, because she has a Swedish citizenship, so she could. But I'm scared, I'm very scared. How would it feel? I've been dreaming about Jaffa all my life, it is my country. To see them live there and I would be a stranger. I don't know if I could handle that." So even though she dreams and wants to go back, she doesn't know if she can. She had the opportunity when she was visiting family in the West Bank, but she in the last minute she withdrew. She didn't go because she didn't dare. She was afraid to be a stranger in her own home. Next one. Next one. Next one again. Yeah. There are also, I think, in return generational cleavages that it's because youth, they have lived on their parents' descriptions and on their parents' dreams, and when coming here, for example, for American Palestinian Americans coming here for summer visits, they say, someone said like this: "But when I came here, I stopped loving it, to be honest, because it wasn't like the images that had been presented throughout the diaspora and the refugee ship." And a young girl says, "It's just distant memories, and my father gets really irritated with me when I say this." So I think this is a potential source of tension in Palestinian families, the different notions of Palestine, the land, and how it is really visualized when you come here, if you only heard it as a child and as a teenager. But for those young people, it's still important to be Palestinian and to come from Palestine, and to have Palestine as a country. But they don't feel home here. They feel home in the USA or Sweden or otherwise. So being at home and having a homeland is then not necessarily the same thing. Skip that. Yeah, so just to end up, I think that Palestinian nationalism and Palestinian national identity is then one of paradoxes in a sense, because it is created out of exile and expulsion. That's what created in 1948 and the Nakba. It's a very formative event. And the focal point of Palestinian identity is a territory, but it is a territory which is out of reach, and it is somehow a deterritorialized nationalism in that sense. And there is a contradiction or a paradox, you could say, between the hypermobility and the absolute confinement. And both kind of processes are very important in determining Palestinian identity. And there are both strong attachments to the homeland and new modes of feeling identity or belonging and security. Just lastly, the next one. Someone has said like this, his name is Clifford, this constitutive suffering coexists with the skills of survival. Diaspora consciousness lives loss and hope as a defining tension. I think that's the essence, actually, of what I would like to say, that the Palestinian diaspora lives this tension every day, throughout the years, of suffer and struggle, loss and hope, history and future. So there is this strong survival in the Palestinian family and Palestinian identity to kind of redo and reset the order of history and order of events. Thank you so much for listening, and sorry for being rapid.